Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Lovely. Thank you for that. Welcome, welcome. We are so happy to have each and every one of you with us here today. I am Erica Gold-Kestenberg. I am the Associate Director for Educator Development and Practice, and my co-MC for this experience in these 2 days is Dr.
Dana Thompson-Dorsey. I'm Associate Director for Research and Development at CUE.
So we will be coming in and out and kind of guiding you through your next 2 days experience. This is our third annual Center for Urban Education Summer Educators Forum, also known as CUESEF. And we are, again, thrilled to have you with us today. We have 2 full days of extraordinary experiences with scholars locally and nationally to work with us together as we grow in being culturally responsive educators. And we encourage you to tweet throughout. You see our social media hashtags and everything else here. They will be in most of your rooms, but please make a note so that you can continue to use them throughout the day. There's going to be a lot of rich dialogue and a lot of rich information happening over the next 2 days, and we want to make sure to share it out with the world to as many people as we can. And we know that the more that we do this work and the more that we can get this out in the world, the more of a difference it will make in our schools and our communities around education, because we know that culturally responsive education, as research shows, is particularly powerful for all of us to use as a way of being and doing in our classrooms, and especially for Black and Brown students. Research shows that being culturally responsive provides a greater sense of belonging in the classroom, as well as increases attendance, engagement, achievement, and graduation rates. Everything that we want to have happen, right, for all of our students, but especially our Black and Brown students, as we want to continue to learn how to be better educators and more culturally responsive for all of our students. And we also all benefit when we do this, right? Because we get a deeper understanding of our students, a deeper understanding of ourselves, of our families, and our communities. And it's really where we believe that the deep, rich action happens. Speaking of our students, the Center for Urban Education thinks that it's important to always be thoughtful and responsive ourselves in what we do and how we be. And that means being able to really pay attention to what's happening with our students, with our communities, with our world. And so we are going to take a moment today to do that. When our students are experiencing so much from what's happening around us with immigration, with Antoine Rose II, and we want to just bring that moment into our room the way we encourage you to do that in your own classrooms, and to be mindful of what our students are experiencing. And we want to take a moment now to acknowledge particularly Antoine Rose II, one of our Woodland Hills School District students, a Black student who was just unjustly gunned down by a police officer last Tuesday, so it's now been 1 week. And we want to just take a moment to say his name and to have a moment of silence in his honor, and to think about him and his family and all of us who mourn for that loss. So for everyone who would like to join me, if we could please say his name and have a moment of silence. Antoine Rose II. Thank you. We also want to acknowledge that we have some Woodland Hills School District staff with us today. Can we see you? Are you here yet? We just want to wrap a little extra love around each and every one of you today and acknowledge your humanity and our collective humanity. And we want to be aware that all of us go through this, right? So we want to be aware that our students are experiencing this and that we are experiencing this as well, and to have some compassion for our students and for each other in this work. I don't know if we do that enough for each other. And that's also part of being responsive, right? And so we just want to really acknowledge the importance of that with us individually and collectively. And that's part of what we believe in CUE as well. And I'm going to share a little bit more about CUE. For those of you who may not know what we are about, this is our vision for the Center for Urban Education. It's to be a space of learning and sharing with communities to positively transform educational opportunities and experiences. And we believe being culture responsive is one of the keys to this work. These are some of our other belief statements. We believe in learning. Learning from and with others is essential for building knowledge and understanding. We believe deeply in relationships, that they're the core of effective instructional policies and practices, and assets. Really, people and communities have a wide range of strengths and assets from which we should recognize, cultivate, and build. Sharing what we know and possess to enrich communities and collective interests. Equity, striving and advocating for equitable and justice-centered policies and practices. And action, moving our knowledge, understanding, and skills into action to improve education and society. For the next 2 days, we're going to really be delving deep into what it means to be a culturally responsive educator and together to grow our practice. Our program can be found in your folders in order to navigate the space in these next 2 days. So if you look inside, you'll find that there is a schedule on the right that also has all of the speakers' bios. Well, it's actually on your left. On your left, there's a schedule with everyone's bios. On the schedule, you will see that it says Core 1, Core 2, Core 3, and Core 4. You'll also notice that each of you has a color-coded folder. There's this color, there's yellow, there's green, and there's blue. All of you will be experiencing all 4 of our core sessions over the next 2 days in a rotating basis. So that's just showing you where you'll rotate. So your cores and what class you'll go to and what time are here on the right side, okay? So this is when it says Core 1, you go to this. And this will tell you the session and the location. You also have the Wi-Fi password information here, and you have an evaluation also on that right side at the end of our session. So we also have all of us CUE folk who are walking around with these shirts on today. They can help support you in navigating these 2 days together. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to ask. As far as the space as well, we wanted to let you know just some key fundamental things with this building. So you are sitting right now in room 120. This is where we'll have our morning keynotes, our lunch sessions, and our second day, end of day reflection. That will be here in room 120. This is the first floor. The lobby will always have our breakfasts and lunches. And then the first floor has all the room numbers that start with a 1. So 104, 106, 107 are down here. And then upstairs, anything that starts with a 2, 206, 207, those are right up the stairs. If you go to the left out here, between the double doors are one set of stairs. And then at the back corner, I feel like I'm on an airplane. The back corner, you will also find another set of stairs. And toward the back of the building, you'll also find an elevator, okay, that will take you both upstairs and downstairs. And the bathrooms, I'm not sure who designed this building, probably was not a woman because there are no bathrooms on this first floor. And if we need to run and deal with multiple bathrooms, it is not happening in this building. So what you do need to do is go down the stairs that are toward the back of the building, either downstairs to the bathrooms or upstairs to the bathrooms. Okay, so they're on the bottom floor and the second floor. Okay, critical information, bathrooms. Okay, so those are some of just the general information, and then you'll also find a small piece of paper that you'll have now that you were handed that shows you the last session of the day, right? That's what we're calling our specials. So that small piece of paper is the special class that you will go to with the title and the location. Okay, so that's an overall rundown, but we want to move on to our brilliant keynote speaker. So I am going to pause there. And again, if you have any questions about anything at all, please feel free to stop any of us in our CUE shirts for anything that you need. And Hi, Dr. Rich Milner, our fearless leader, director of the Center for Urban Education. Woo-hoo! I will pass the baton.
Thank you. Good morning again. I'm Dana Thompson Dorsey, and I have the great pleasure of introducing our first keynote. Our keynote will be Dean Valerie Kinloch, who is the Renee and Richard Goldman Dean, right here at the University of Pittsburgh in the School of Education. She is just finishing her first year and entering her second year as our dean. Her research focuses on culturally responsive literacy, community engagement, work with urban youth. And I have to say I feel a kinship because we came in together last year at the same time, so we're both entering our second year here in the School of Education. So it's important to mention that Dean Kinloch also had a book that was an outstanding book with AERA, American Educational Research Association, in 2012 called Harlem on Our Minds, Place, Race, and the Literacies of Our Urban Youth. And it is that work that will inform her keynote today. So without any further hesitation, please welcome Dean Valerie Kinloch.
Checking.
This is a sisterhood.
So as we're about to get started, I want to actually just first say thank you for inviting me, Center for Urban Education, and thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be here, not just as your keynote speaker for this morning, but also as the Renee and Richard Goldman Dean of our School of Education, the first Black woman dean of any school at Pitt. And I'm getting used to saying that, especially as we walk across different spaces, and in different spaces, they're oftentimes hostile, particularly for Black and brown people in the United States and across the world. And so I want to talk today about moving toward relevant and sustaining pedagogies. I want to think about our young people in schools and communities, and I also want to think about our responsibility to this work. So I want to get started. Do you know the song? So I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. I'm going to ask, would you please stand if you are committed to equity and justice? Can you please stand? Can you rise up, please? And so in standing, I'm asking you to do this with me. I'm asking that we demonstrate this commitment to equity and justice, that we always rise up, that we do this in what we teach and how we teach and who we teach and how we interact with our young people in schools and in communities. I ask that we do this visibly and publicly and urgently, without guilt, without apologies, without remorse, without questioning our actions. I ask that we demonstrate compassion and care and concern and love for other people, and particularly Black and brown people in these United States and across the world. Can we do this work? Yes. Can we be committed to equity and justice? Yes. Can we do this work in our teaching and our research and in all of our engagements across the world? Yes. Thank you for rising up. Thanks. So let's actually get started. And thank you for rising with me. This has been some troubling times that we live in. The things that are happening across the world, particularly in the United States when it comes to the assaults on Black and brown bodies. And so I want to talk about that a bit, but I want to talk about that as the movement toward relevant and sustaining pedagogies. And I do that by first pausing and also acknowledging the Center for Urban Education and its fearless leader, Dr. Rich Moner. I want to say that I am very grateful for the trust that you have placed in me to actually start this summer forum for Center for Urban Education. I value you, Dr. Moner, as a colleague wherever we might be, wherever we walk in the world. We will always walk together in the name of equity and justice. And so I want to take this moment to thank you publicly for all the work that you have done and continue to do on behalf of urban education in this world. So thank you. I also want to thank his colleagues. So all of those who work in are affiliated with the Center for Urban Education. Can you sort of wave your hands and be acknowledged? Because this is important work that they do. And then finally, how could I not acknowledge all of my colleagues who might be here who are in the School of Education? So if you're here, can you sort of wave your hands and be acknowledged? Thank you. So toward relevant and sustaining pedagogies. Toward relevant and sustaining pedagogies because of Antoine Rose, because of Black Lives Mattering, because of Charlottesville, Virginia, because of Antoine Rose and Miriam Kelly and Kamani Gray. We move toward relevant and sustaining pedagogies because of Rebecca Boyd, because of Terrence Crutcher, because of Antoine Rose, because of Sandra Bland, Eric Gardner, because of Black and brown bodies in these United States. We move toward relevant and sustaining pedagogies because of Walter Scott, because of Tanisha Anderson, Freddie Gray, because Black Lives Matter is a movement. It's a way of surviving, which affirms the lives of Black queer and trans folks, disabled folks, Black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. We move toward relevant and sustaining pedagogies because Black lives matter, and Black lives center those who have been marginalized within liberation movements. Black Lives Matter. We move toward relevant and sustaining pedagogies because of Michael Brown, because of Antoine Rose, and because of so many others. Because of Antoine Rose, and because of Antoine Rose, we move toward Black Lives Matter because of sustaining and relevant pedagogies that we need to enact in our practices and in the ways in which we live in this world, because of Antoine Rose. And in this movement, I sort of focus on a lot of scholars, but particularly the scholars who are listed here. I've been thinking a lot about Antoine Rose. It happened when I was in China visiting different universities, and I was just having a conversation at East China Normal University, and the question from the Dean of Education there was, is it really possible for us to think about quality and diversity simultaneously? And I said, I think you're looking at quality and diversity simultaneously here. And I said it. And so when we think about quality and diversity, there should be no question. In order for us to do the work of relevancy and sustainability when it comes to education, there should be no question about our commitment to equity, diversity, justice, and those things lead to quality. Quality do not produce those things. We produce quality. And in producing quality, these are some of the scholars I turn to. When we think about culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, I would be remiss if I don't talk about Geneva Gay and Gloria Ladson-Billings and James Banks and all these other fine scholars who have produced research that tells us that we need to focus on the lives and literacies and well-being of students inside of schools and communities. I also think about culturally affirming instruction. Lisa Delpit was here earlier this year, and she talked about what does it mean to actually engage in affirming pedagogical practices for our students every day in classrooms. And then we move toward culturally sustaining pedagogies, a framework that Django Paris initially designed. And it comes directly from Gloria Ladson-Billings and Geneva Gay's scholarship on relevancy and responsiveness. And for him, it is not to replace relevancy and responsiveness with yet a new framework, but it is to say, if we are committed to the lives and literacies of our young people in schools and across the world, how do we remain committed to them in ways where their lives, their languages from their familial communities are always sustained in whatever we do with them inside of our classrooms? We are always looking for who our young people are. And so these are some of the people who I refer to when I think about this work and the importance of really engaging in this work and not just simply trying it on and taking it off because it's hard. We have to be committed to it. And so culturally responsive pedagogy, or teaching, as Gloria Ladson-Billings tells us, is an approach that empowers students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically. And it's this approach that uses cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And then on the other side of this, we have scholars Django Paris and Sami Alim, who talk about culturally sustaining pedagogy, existing wherever education sustains the lifeways of communities who have been and continue to be damaged and erased through schooling. And that's real. Being damaged and erased through schooling. And that happens all the time. Every day inside of schools and in communities where we are not acknowledging the legacies of our young people, their cultural practices, their intellectual traditions, and we are erasing who they are and trying to make them who they aren't. And we have to question, why are we continuing to do this inside of schools that really don't like us and don't affirm our well-being? What do we do differently? So the whys of this work. I use these images often, and this first image I've talked about many times. I just haven't really had the bravery and courage to even play the video because it's in my home state of South Carolina. Do we recognize that first image? What is it? Where is it from? What is it?
It's the SRO who dragged, is that the female student? There's the two.
Mm-hmm.
And dragged her out of her classroom and knocked over her desk and pulled her out of her chair. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then do you see the student sitting sort of like right behind this? Kind of like really can't even watch it. That sort of shock, like this is happening in front of me. So I work with a teacher in South Carolina who actually knows the student who's being slammed and thrown to the ground. And the pain and horror of that teacher telling me, like when I saw her and her mother, her extended family, the feeling of anguish and like, what do we do? Like this is happening inside of our schools with our young people who we are supposed to protect and love and care for. And this is happening inside of our schools. Like, when is enough enough? And when do we start talking about, when we say moving toward relevancy and sustainability in education, really, what does that mean? when these things continue to happen. And so why culturally relevant and sustaining? Because we need to examine race and racism in schools and in society. Because we need to understand race as a social construct. We need to really affirm positive racial identities. I don't know if we really know how to do that inside of schools, and hence, for that matter, inside of society. If we did, I wouldn't be talking about Antoine Rose or Freddie Gray or Michael Brown. How do we affirm positive racial identities that our young people already have that we oftentimes erase or make invisible? And we also need this work toward relevancy and sustainability because we need to talk about how to better interrogate injustices in society in order to empower our students and hence ourselves as well. Why? Look, the images just don't stop. And it's not just images. These are realities. We have a first lady who wears a jacket that talks about not caring as she's about to go and, you know the story. We have the image here in the center that so many people have debated me the first time I presented the image in the center, and someone said, really, it's not that problematic, is it? All right, so you're gonna call a black boy coolest monkey in the jungle. And we're not going to interrogate that in the image and the message and the larger discourse. And then we have this image here. I mean, all of these images pain me, including this image here. And do we know what this represents? Yes. And so why culturally relevant and sustaining? So yes, we need to talk about the inclusion of our students' identities and lived experiences inside of our classrooms. And yet I contend that that's only the beginning of this work. If we're really going to do this work, we need to do this refusal. We need to refuse to continue colonizing inquiries and deficit perspectives about the cultures of oppressed communities. It is colonization, it is oppression, and it is injustice. And how do we refuse to engage in deficit perspectives toward groups and groups of people who continue to be assaulted and hence murdered in streets and dehumanized inside of classrooms? So I want to actually give you an example of some of this work inside of a school. And it was my last year in Columbus, Ohio, before I moved here. I was working with Derek. And I was working in Derek, 17 years old, African-American identified male, Truth High School, northeast side of Columbus. And I really wasn't working with Derek. I was working inside of his classroom with about 30 other students for almost a year and a half. And it was in this particular environment where Miss Washington, a veteran public school teacher for about 18 years, she and I had conversations for a number of years. It's like, what is it that we do to interrupt the discourse? Like, what do we do? It's not enough to create lessons and to say, let's have a lesson, let's teach it, let's keep moving on, let's teach to the test. Because we are noticing that the lives of so many people inside of our classrooms are not really being attended to by administration, and in fact, by us. So what is it that we do? So in comes Derek. And, it was the first day of this new school year. I walked into school. I've been in this school building so many times. I walked in. And this is what happened. So Derek, 5 feet 6 inches tall, head half bowed, and eyes dreaming of something that appeared very far away. He was neither passive nor quiet. But as he said to me, I'm always thinking about something better than all of this. I asked him, what is better? He says a better school, better interactions with peers, better relationships with teachers. I want a better life opportunity, is what he called better. Better appeared in his facial reaction and in each word that came out of his mouth. Some of his peers and teachers at Truth High School warned me to not work with Derek. And they said that his desire for better really only meant that he was being different, angry, and troubled. And I was like, how can we talk about young people as being different and troubled? And we are committed to teaching inside of urban public schools. So I needed to interrogate all of that. and I decided to do so. So Derek and I first met when we were walking in the hallway leading to this English class. I accidentally bumped into him, and on reflection, I don't know if it was an accident, in all honesty, but I did bump into him, and he mean-mugged me. And you know what that means. And he mean-mugged me, and I kind of mean-mugged him back, and I was like, okay, I'm sorry, Derek. And he threw me a hard look with an exaggerated and aggressive facial expression. And he said to me, "You looking at me? You don't want this." And I said, "My bad, I'm sorry." And he stared. And I reached my hand toward his shoulder, and the mean-mugging intensified. So I knew the code implied in all of that, so I let it go until I saw that we were walking into the same classroom. And I asked who he was. And he said, "You talking to me still, dude?" So I let it go. And then later, it was a student who suggested that I just don't bother Derek since, quote, "He don't want to be here anyways, miss, so just leave him alone." But in my heart, I knew I couldn't leave him alone. And so for days, I kept thinking about his question. "You talking to me?" And I was. And the way he asked that question, as if he both dared me to answer it, but as if he wanted me to answer it. So the next time I ran into Derek was near the school's front office. And again, he stared at me. And I said, "Hey, Derek, how you doing?" And his stare faded, and he responded, "I'm good." But then it was that quick, "I'm good, but wait, how you know my name? And why are you talking to me anyway?" And so I said, "I'm here to collaborate with you, to write with you." And Derek responded, "You trying to collaborate with me? That's why you said my name? You just like everyone else. You want something, and I ain't into that writing." And he walked off. So that was my first interaction with Derek, and my second interaction with Derek. And what did I want? I wanted to engage with Derek, hence I bumped into him. I wanted to question this narrative that was placed on Derek as being someone who would never engage with anyone else inside of the space of a school. I wanted to interrupt that discourse of Derek always getting in trouble and always getting suspended. There was something in Derek that I saw in myself. There was something in Derek that I saw in my two older brothers, and I just couldn't shake this feeling. Like, I wanted to belong to Derek, even if he did not want to belong to me. And so fast forward a few months, we're inside of class. And as I stated, he's sitting in the front, he's head half bowed, he's like hands folded over, and he's like, totally, I am not doing this work. And then Ms. Washington says to me, "Dr. K, do you have the prompt that you want students to talk about and write about?" So I shared this prompt with students. And the prompt was, if you can change anything that you want to change, what would it be and why? That's it. If you can change anything, what would it be and why? So Derek, head half bowed, bell eventually rings, he leaves. Next day he comes in, we're having conversations. What would you want to change? Students are volunteering, they're reading, they're talking about ideas. Derek sits there. So I sit next to Derek and I say, "Derek, what would you change?" He's like, "You still talking to me?" After like 2 months. I'm like, I am still talking to you. And so he handed me this piece of paper. And, everyone's like, "Derek, just leave him alone." And he handed me this piece of paper, and this is what he actually said. If he can change anything that he wants to change, he would actually do this. And I want you to hear Derek's voice. It's like, what? I mean, that last line there, I would give almost anything in the world just to be normal and not be disrespectful or rude anymore. But that was only the beginning. Derek continued. So he initially gave this to me, and he said, just read it. Since you want to keep bothering me and calling me by name, just read it. And so he gave it to me. I took it. I'm talking to other students, and I'm talking, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I'm going to keep calling Derek's name. I'm going to go back over to Derek. So I go back over to Derek, and then I say to Derek, you know, it's this part here about the disrespecting adults a lot. Let's talk about that. And he was like, no one here understands me. I'm always getting suspended. So yes, I turn to my friends. When there is something happening in school and my friends are involved, I will have their back because that's all I know. But I am smart. Like, I know how to do work. And it was like, let's talk about that a little more, only if you want to. And he talked more about it. And I want to bring your attention to the part here where he says, I don't have my dad in my life. I haven't seen my dad in about a year or so. And it's like, we tend to judge our students based on what we think they're doing in front of us inside of classrooms without really attending to something might be going on that we can't even imagine or see. He has siblings. He's in school. He has to leave school to go to work. He has to leave work to go home to help with his siblings. He has to figure out if he can do homework, and then he has to get back up the next day to come to school, and he's 17 years old. And yet we have this larger narrative oftentimes about what students aren't doing because they don't want to do. And most of the time, they're doing more than we would even ever imagine doing at 17 or at 35 or at 50. And it's like the lives that our young people are leading must be accounted for, and how we teach and what we teach, and the reason why we even go into this profession in the first place. And Derek, out of so many other young people across the country who've invited me into their lives, he's actually taught me that. He shows me that every day, and he continues to do so. And so when he talks about not having his dad in his life, and when he decided to stand up the next day in class and read this essay to all of us for the first time, and his peers are looking at him like, what are you about to do, Derek? Derek, you tripping. What are you about to do? Like, please, don't pay attention. And he starts reading it, and the room falls silent. And there is a connection. And you should see the other young people in the room whose faces just kind of fall flat like, oh. And the conversation that ensued that we could never have planned for. The conversation was, wow, it feels like you just wrote about my life. I didn't realize you had this going on too, Derek. Can we talk? And it's like, it's nothing that we can plan for. And so my message here is not that you go planning to ask students, do you have a parent or not in your life? Like, we don't do that. Like, okay? Like, don't do that. I mean, because the mean mugging that I got is going to be probably more intensified. And so I just want to make sure we're not doing that. But this is what we do. We listen. We be patient even when patience seems like it's not going to actually pay off. We are present. We are thinking about learning and about teaching with our students. We are co-creating these spaces. After 2 months of Derek not talking to me, I continue to walk by him. I continue to just say, good morning, Derek, how are you doing? I continue even if he's not reciprocating it. And I'm not pushing myself on Derek, but I'm acknowledging his humanity. I am talking about the importance of seeing students and seeing students for what they show us, but moving way beyond what they show us. Even if Derek did not think that he was brilliant, I thought he was brilliant. Even if Derek said he was not a writer, I thought he was a writer. And I actually helped him to see that it is okay to stand in front of your classroom and to be who you are. Like, don't be anyone else. Don't become me. Don't become your peers. Be who you are and stand in your power to do the work that you are meant to do, as Alice Walker tells us. This is the work that we are meant to do in the world, and if our souls tell us to do it, then we need to do it. And when Derek stood up and he did it, and he read this, and this is not even it. This is not even it. Like, this is the piece that we were like, tears falling down our faces. When he actually said, I'm going to read one more piece for you, and I want you to tell me what you think about this. That's when we knew something powerful was already happening. Gandhi? I mean, he said it, you heard him. And he says, my man Gandhi. And so I'm just sitting there like, you know, trying to be Dr. Kinloch. I'm just sitting there like hard-faced, and I'm like, oh my God. And he looks at me and he was like, I mean, you know, my man Gandhi told me that. I was like, when did Gandhi tell you this? And then he starts talking about Gandhi and all of the stuff that Gandhi has done. And we're sitting there, and it's just like to see his teacher and to see me, but more importantly, to see his peers sit there, and we are just like in awe. And then the tears start falling. And he's like, all right, y'all, you know what, that's it, that's enough. But my man Gandhi said to be the change that you wish to see in the world. So that's a powerful hook. How do we use that to spark conversation, to actually become more imaginative with our students when they offer this to us as opposed to ignoring what they say? And then the sort of painful part here is that if I could live up to this quote, I would. That's not a period. The next word is but. It means but I can't, because I feel like something is holding me back. And that's the piece that we need to interrupt. We need to question, what is it that's holding you back? We need to figure out, instead of being a therapist here, we need to figure out what is it that I need to do in my pedagogical practices and engagements with students in my classroom. Thank you. That get to this. That get us to say, what is it that you think is holding you back? But I don't need to ask you that directly, because I can embody that question and how I approach you as a human being and not just as a student in a classroom. How do I do this work? How do I commit to relevant and sustaining pedagogies by getting to know my students? If we had ignored this, do you know the damage that would have happened? Like, we got his permission to talk about this in the school-wide meeting that we had at Truth High School. And then we got permission from Derek to actually come and actually share with every teacher and administrator where this came from. And then when he walked down the hallway a week later and saw that this was posted on the board, it was like, oh, like I'm feeling like, you know, I'm feeling like I'm a superstar kind of attitude. And it's like, I want all students to feel as if they're superstars. And I want to go beyond that. I want all students to know that they are, in fact, brilliant and brave and beautiful and capable of doing everything that they can imagine and even more. That's what I want for our students. And if we are committed to relevant and sustaining pedagogy, there is no question that that is what we have to commit to when we are teaching, even in the most difficult moments. Even when we feel as if our students are not with us, we have to be there all the time with them. And that's the work of relevancy and sustainability. And so I came to know Derek across this time as someone who is more than an engaged learner. I came to see his performances of resistance as entries into and invitations into getting to know more about him as not just a student, but as a human being. His behavior often got misread in educational spaces as angry and hostile and quasi-violent. And so when I worked with Derek, we played around with phrases. And he said to me, it's a performance, right? And I said, it's a performance of resistance. And together we came up with this phrase, performance of resistance, because it refers to a way of communicating or a particular way of responding to the negative gaze, the degrading treatment, and the hurtful assumptions many youth of color encounter, not just in schools, but in communities. Derek engaged in a performance of resistance. We all did. I think. You know, like the eye rolling, the sharp verbal responses we give, sometimes the silences that our students give to us, the seemingly disinterested disposition that they might actually embody. Those, in my opinion, are performances of resistance because students don't want to feel as if they're being alienated or misunderstood. And if we don't make a connection with our students, then we can't question why that silence or performance of resistance is there. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to read this because I've been thinking about this. Given that schools are primary sites of ideological struggle for racial and linguistic equality, for educational equity, against the criminalization and disenfranchisement of students of color, I believe, and Derek teaches me, that young people's performances of resistance are not uncommon, but they're definitely misunderstood. And we need to question why. So some considerations for this work. There are lots of considerations. We can be here for this entire forum talking about this. There are lots of things that we have to consider. So for example, I think the easy piece that so many of the teachers I've worked with tell me might not be easy, but then they learn how to do it, and then we give them support, is to co-construct these learning spaces with students. Like, why is Derek sitting in a corner and everyone else is sitting over here? How do we invite Derek in? How do we do this? Like, how do we talk with students to co-construct the type of learning environment that we know already we need? But when we walk into a classroom, it doesn't exist. The point here is not to walk in and take what's there, but to remake it into what we know works for our students, and to do that without apology. Some considerations. Gloria Ladson-Billings talks about having a willingness to nurture and support cultural competence and the development of critical consciousness. If we are not talking about equity and critical consciousness, then we're really not talking about culturally relevant and sustaining pedagogies. We're not. And if we're really not talking about critical consciousness, then you can't tell me you're talking about teaching. Teaching is about producing critical consciousness. And then Django Paris tells us that in order to think about and to enact culturally sustaining pedagogies, there is no question that we need to foster what he calls linguistic, literate, and cultural pluralism as part of the democratic project of schooling. And the word democratic is not by accident. It's the democratic project of schooling, which means that everything else that is not grounded and situated in an equitable framework is probably not democratic. How do we do this work? Some additional considerations. You know, I think it's easy to listen to students and their stories. I think so. You know, if we value language and literacy and cultures, then we listen to people and we learn what they're telling us as opposed to having the assumption that we know what we should give them. We listen, we learn, we build, we co-create these learning environments. In order to do that, we have to also talk about power and opportunity, access to power and educational opportunity. And if we're not talking about those things, then we will continue to say that there's a proliferation of deficit perspectives that get enacted onto students, and particularly students of color. We have to talk about schooling as an environment, as a site of opportunity. And once we do that, that opportunity presents itself inside of how we teach in classrooms, but also when we walk out of classrooms, we have to have that same attitude and mindset that it's always about opportunity for our students. And I think you already know, I'm going to say equity and justice, because we have to be committed to equity and justice in everything that we do. You know, we can't take these things off. Like, I can't say that I am committed to equity, and then I walk into communities and I have a gaze that I'm actually using, and I'm viewing communities in a deficit perspective. Equity and justice. That community might not look like your familial community. But let me just say that that is a community. and it has traditions and cultural practices that need to be honored and respected. How do we do this work in loving ways? And then finally, some additional considerations. I'm not going to continue to say equity, because you already know. So how about we talk about inequities, because they're persistent. So if we're working toward equity in education, we need to start naming those inequities that actually force us to talk about equity. What are we doing in our classrooms or not? How are we engaging with students or not? Let's talk about economics and the resources not afforded to some schools and school districts that are afforded to others. Let's talk about access. Who has access to high-quality teachers and learning, and who doesn't? Let's also talk about the fact that when a school that is considered low-performing gets a really great principal, somewhere along the way, someone wants to take that great principal out of that school and put them somewhere else. How about we talk about that? How about we talk about administration? The fact that when I walk into certain spaces, I am the only black or brown body in that space. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fact that we really do not know how to talk about race in this country. And if we don't know how to talk about race, we definitely do not know how to talk about racism. And yet we see Antoine Rose, and we see Freddie Gray, and we see Michael Brown, and the lives that have been taken from us. Like, we have to change the system. And yet, as many of the teachers I work with tell me, Valerie, the system is in place. How do we change a system? So this is what I leave you with. Maybe we create our own system. We know how to teach. We know how to love our students and care for our students. We support them. We stay after school, come before school. We're on the weekends, grading papers. We're in the store buying supplies out of our own money. We are doing this work. We know how to talk with, for example, Derek, to get him to stand before us and to do this work. So if we know this, then why do we continue to do what we know doesn't work? We have to think about that. And so finally, if you know me, and if you've worked with me, you know I like to do some kind of visual at the end. I'm not going to go through this, but this is just a visual in terms of when we talk about this work, there's so many things that we have to account for, and I haven't even scratched the surface. So when we talk about culturally relevant and sustaining, we have to talk about access. We have to talk about innovation. We have to talk about policy, engagement. We have to talk about resources. We have to talk about creating new frontiers for this type of work to really happen. And it can't be a project. It has to be a way of being. We have to talk about new evaluation systems for all of us, because the ones we have, in my opinion, really don't work. And we need to talk about geographies. And if we can begin to do some of this work, then we begin to really get to the heart of what culturally relevant, responsive, affirming, sustaining pedagogies look like. And until then, we are continuing to reproduce a system that just does not work for so many of our people. And when do we stand up, and when do we say enough is enough? And so I end with this. I end with the reality that Antoine Rose is no longer here. I end with the reality that we have to stand for justice and equity even when no one else is standing with us. We have to commit to this work. We have to understand that our individual realities might not be the realities of other people, and that should be okay as long as we understand how to dig deep and how to recognize and honor the lives of other people who don't look like us, who might not talk like us, whose communities might not look like our communities. What we have to do is to have an unabiding, unwavering commitment to this work. And I'm telling you, it has to run deep in our soul. And if it is not there, if it is not there, I have to question, why do we commit to doing this work? You know, why do we commit to doing this work if we can't feel that fire when we see injustice happening, particularly with our young people? Like, you know, and I had a moment in China when I saw the news story about Antoine Rose, and I had a moment. And when I saw that news story, I was at Beijing Normal University. And I was supposed to be talking about partnerships. I had a moment because I turned my phone on and someone texted me about Antoine Rose. And so, you know, I said to the dean, I'm gonna need a moment. He was like, oh, for what? All right, let me tell you for what. Because I'm going back to the United States. I'm going back to Pittsburgh. And the fact that another black person, young person, has been murdered means that I need a moment. And I'm going to take a moment. And I took a moment. And then we came back and we talked about equity. I end there. We need to do more than talk. We need to embody. We need to believe. We need not apologize. And we need to stand for something because of the lives of other people. So in conclusion, Audre Lorde says that our lives depend on this. We gotta translate this work for other people, is what some folks say. I'm going to contend that I'm not translating it for anyone. You have to learn it, and you have to want it, and you have to care about our young people so much that you are going to be committed to doing whatever you have to do to learn it and not to rely on other people to always show it to you. And when we get there, then we can all talk about relevancy and sustainability in education. Thanks.